Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Retrain the Dyslexic Brain graduate case studies. I'm Dr. Rebecca Troy, and I'm super excited to present to you yet another one of our amazing client cases. So if you are newer to our community, welcome. Every other week, we have made the intention to share the celebration and the life-altering change that has occurred in one of our clients as a result of them going through our program. And so we do this for a couple of reasons. Number one, we are obviously very, very proud of our clients and the progress that they have made in our program. But second, I think it's really powerful to continue to tell the story of what's possible. So dyslexia, unfortunately, is one of those things that people really misunderstand. And it's very, very frequent where people will say, there's just simply nothing you can do to support a child with dyslexia. You absolutely have to live with this forever. And that just couldn't be further from the truth. And so we hope that by hearing all of these stories week after week, that you do start to believe in the opportunity and the possibility of what is capable in a human brain, especially when there's love and support and the right strategies behind it. So today I am very pleased to talk about Caleb, a 10-year-old. He's now 11, but 10 years old when he finished the program, who went from being 52% accurate in his phonological awareness to 83% accurate. His scores on the Wide Range Achievement Test 5 went from the first percentile to the 25th percentile. His spelling scores went from the first percentile to the 12th, with an additional 13 items that he had just one letter off, which would have put his spelling actually at the 75th percentile. But every piece of that data is something that happened within 5 months' time. And so, this was a quote from his mom. She said he made more growth in 3 months of doing this program than he did the previous 6 years of intervention. And so I'm sure that those of you listening can absolutely resonate with that. So we're very, very excited to tell you Caleb's story. So let's dive right in. So if you haven't been with us before, everything that we are about to talk about is something that Kristi and Caleb did at home. And so we give families cutting edge neuroscience techniques in order to change and reorganize how the brain is responding to language, which makes reading and spelling exponentially easier, but we give them to you so that you can do these from the comfort of your own home. And so whether it's that you live in a rural area, or your school doesn't offer reading support, or your school does offer reading support and it just has not been going well and it's not tailored or individualized to exactly what your child needs, we have the ability to help you in your home. And so your kiddo doesn't have to miss any classes or be embarrassed or any of those things. Like, this just gets to be something that happens in a 10 to 15 minute interval on a daily basis. And so every bit of this massive increase that we're about to talk about with Caleb happened within 5 months in 10 to 15 minutes a day at home with his mother. So before we dive too far into the data, I always feel like I would be remiss to not help people more deeply understand dyslexia and the differences in the brain that exist for a person with and without. So you'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen here are two brains in an fMRI. So on the left is a non-dyslexic person, or someone with typical language development, and on the right is someone with dyslexia. And so what you're going to notice is that there is a difference in this neurological profile when you're asking this person to do a language task. So if I said, okay, kids, I want you to read this word, or I want you to spell this word, or read this paragraph, or write me this paragraph, or even, remember this list of words. This is what happens when a typical person experiences a language task. You'll notice that there is activity in this back part of the brain that we call the occipital lobe, where vision is controlled. And there's also significantly more activity in these side areas, which we call the parietal temporal lobes, where a lot of the auditory functions of our brain exist. And so what's different, you'll notice, is that in a person with dyslexia, We literally don't have that same activity in the visual center, and we have far less in the auditory centers. So what that means is quite literally what the child sees and what they hear do not neurologically match, which is why your kiddo might add in a letter that doesn't make any sense when they're trying to spell something, or they might omit a letter or even an entire syllable because it's like they didn't even hear that word right. Or they might be decoding along and decode the first two letters and then everything else is a guess. Or maybe they worked really, really hard to decode a word that appears two lines later, and it's like amnesia. Like, I've never seen that word before, even though I just saw it 2 lines ago. So a lot of those things happen because of the way that the brain is responding to language, or I guess in this case, the lack of response. But here's what's really amazing. So this is actually an EEG now of the same kind of profile, but look at what's possible after support. So you can see, just like before, we've got this activity in the back and in the sides for a typical reader, none in the back, far less on the sides for a reader with dyslexia. But after neurological support, the brain is a hugely dynamic organ that has the capacity to change over time. And it's so, so powerful to recognize that you can actually shift and change the response for a reader with dyslexia, so that when they see and hear letters and sounds, they can actually do that now the same way that a typical reader could. And so I think, just like we used to think once upon a time that the world was flat, people used to think that the brain was static and that IQ was fixed and that you're either smart or you're not smart, and it's this binary thing. But the more and more that we uncover and the better our technology and equipment becomes, and the more we study, the more we recognize that the brain is actually able to be changed in adulthood too, and quite frequently. So whether it's changing because we used to do something and we don't anymore. Maybe I used to speak a foreign language and I stopped practicing. So my brain will kind of prune some of that away. Or maybe I've learned a new skill like playing an instrument, or maybe I've learned a new language, or maybe, like in the case of the study with the London taxi cab drivers, after they had to study the map of the city for a period of weeks, their brains physically changed and they had more lateral and spatial thinking capacity than they did a few weeks before. And so I think it's just a really, really powerful thing. So if you are a parent of a child with dyslexia and you feel hopeless and you've given up on this idea that things could ever get better, this is the wake-up call to say, do not believe that that is true. And so let's tell you a real life story of how this manifested in a real human life. So we interviewed Caleb's mama, Kristi, and this is what she had to say about Caleb's experience. So she said it was really interesting because in kindergarten, you could ask Caleb what his name was, and he would spell it out. He'd say, "My name is Caleb, C-A-L-E-B." But if you put those same exact letters on the table and you asked him which one is the B, he wouldn't be able to tell you. And which one is the C, wouldn't be able to tell you. And so it was this disconnect where, she said he couldn't even accurately pick out any of the letters of his name. And so because he was their first child, she didn't understand what dyslexia was. She didn't know what dyslexia meant. But in kindergarten, she had noticed these things, and so too had his very great teacher. And so I think it is rare to have an elementary school teacher, unfortunately, that knows the signs and symptoms of dyslexia. And so Caleb was lucky in that his teacher did. And she called him in and said, "Hey, I think we need to talk a little bit more about Caleb and seeing some things." And she got him tested, and well, that part came later, but it was a little bit daunting to realize that, like, holy cow, he's actually struggling. So mentally, that was a little difficult because she thought that if her son did have dyslexia, every aspiration for him wasn't going to be what she thought. They are in Texas, and so you have to be tested through school. So the original testing results showed that he had a processing disorder, and that just didn't quite sit right with mom. She said, that just doesn't make any sense. I'm not really seeing that. And so she pursued private testing in addition, because it just was a disconnect for her. And that test did actually say that he was severely dyslexic. And so he would remember sight words for a day or two, and then he couldn't remember. She said the diagnosis was actually a relief because it was named, and then there was a goal that we could try to attain. So I think that that's an important point to bring up, is that sometimes parents are a little scared of getting a diagnosis. Like, I don't want my kid to be labeled, and I don't want them to have different classes or special classes. And so, at least for Kristi, having the diagnosis and putting a name to what was going on was actually a huge relief for her, because then she could make a plan and a goal and figure out how she was going to help him overcome it. But not for a second was she convinced that there was anything else other than that was going to take place. So she said there were not a lot of resources in the public school once you got a diagnosis. You kind of had to find it yourself. And so when she went to these different centers and tutoring facilities and private, places that she found, she said every time those places gave us a glass ceiling, and it was always too low. So they took a look at Caleb and they said, you know what? These are our expectations. We really don't think he's going to progress further than that. He's got such a severe case. This is probably as good as it's going to get. And she said, I just wasn't satisfied with that. I was told in the first grade that I had a gifted and talented child, but he couldn't enter gifted and talented because he couldn't pass the test. And so it was in that moment that Kristi really stepped up her advocacy. She said, we are not going to give up. He also got a dyscalculia diagnosis in third grade. There was this sense of overwhelm. And she just said, like, oh man, we felt the pressure and the stress of the struggle that he was experiencing. And we just really wanted him to be a successful adult. We knew that he had all of these gifts. She said, your child sees in color when the rest of the world sees in black and white. And so she knew she had to do something. They had at that point tried neurofeedback training, which did show positive results in his processing speed. And then, kind of at that same moment, at that point, she ran into us. And she said, I ran into your very colorful picture on Facebook, and here we are. So he's a fifth grader now, and they had a mandatory state test at the beginning of the year. And at that test, he was at a first grade reading level. And Kristi said that was after 6 years of private tutoring and various therapies. So you can tell by her personality that she wasn't just going to be sitting back and waiting for something to happen. She was actively going after solution after solution, and it just wasn't yielding very much of any progress. And so we started with her at the end of November, and she said, you know what, I personally was a little bit worried about being the teacher because Caleb and I see things differently. But she said, we have to give this a try because I can't go on knowing that I haven't done everything that I possibly could have done for him. And so she said by January, which was 2 months later, Caleb went from reading at the first grade level to reading at the third grade, fourth month. And so an ARD committee is, kind of like a committee at the school that gets together to talk about progress and data and all of those things. And so Caleb's ARD committee was astounded. And so then in February, they had another test, and he went up to the fourth grade, fourth month. So just within another month, he made another grade level of progress. She said, I've never seen Caleb write so much in my life. It's been unbelievable. Caleb didn't write a lot in the past. His processing speed had been incredibly sped up. We don't see him word finding anymore. Across the board, we have seen growth. His confidence, he's being more social, he's engaging with other people. Early in the diagnosis process. Back in kindergarten, he started displaying some control tendencies where he would kind of delay so he didn't have to do the activities that he was being asked to do. And now he's willing to take risks. She said it's really fantastic not to have a limiter. The school had anticipated only 10 to 11% of growth, and he was like 200% of growth. So it's truly been amazing for not only Caleb, but for his mama to see what's been possible. She said the school had laws and limiters of what they could say and what they would recommend. And I had my own limited thinking that the expectations that I had for him had to be less because I just didn't understand. And so it was a call to war on my own personal limitations of what I knew and my acceptance of a challenge. There's always an opportunity for growth and development. The only limiters that we have are the ones that we put on ourselves. Kristi said this program has by far shown us the best results that we've seen in a few months than we've seen in the past 6 years. The repetition, the short amount of time, the ability to be flexible, it made it so much easier than if we would have sat down for a private lesson for an hour. The entire ARD committee at the school took Caleb out of additional dyslexia support classes. They have been stunned at his growth. So let's talk about what that growth is and some of the statistics and why it is that Kristi is so excited. So we kind of did this quick overview at the top of the call, but as we take a look at his accuracy, phonological awareness is this skill that we have in early elementary school. We kind of expect that to be mastered by first grade, but that's the brain's ability to hear all of the sounds, take a sound out, put some sounds together before we even have letters. It's the brain's processing ability for sounds. And so as a 10-year-old, he was still getting those incorrect 50% of the time. So we would not expect that to be true of a kiddo his age. So this was actually pretty severe for him. Just as mom said, like he was severely dyslexic, but by the time he finished the course 5 months later, he was 83% accurate. So massive, massive gains in that capacity. So next we're going to talk a little bit about educational statistics. So we'll just do a little primer first. This is the normal distribution curve, and in the middle here we have the 50th percentile, which we would consider to be average. So in any kind of a study where you have a treatment that you are looking at and how effective it was, we've got these metrics that tell us statistically what that is. So when you have a small statistical significance, it's like a 0.3. And consequently, this is actually the same amount of growth that an average kiddo would make in an entire school year is the 0.3. So you start 4th grade, you end 4th grade, that number is typically this much growth in an academic year. So if a program had moderate statistical significance, it would be a 0.5 or half of a standard deviation. But if the program had statistically significant effects, it is going to be nearly an entire standard deviation of growth, or a 0.8. And that's when we know for sure that this intervention has had a positive impact statistically on a child. So when we take a look at Caleb's statistics, before he started, he was at the 1st percentile in reading. So if he would have made what a typical kid would have made in an entire school year, he would have gone to probably the 2nd to 2.5 percentile. So it's that crawling along progress where you're just making little bits of gains. You can see that there was some progress, but it certainly is not closing the gap or making a big leap in terms of the development. But, you know, if Caleb made a statistically significant amount, like we're positive that this program and this intervention had a statistically positive impact on him, he would have made it to this brown dot here. But instead, Caleb made 1, 2.5 standard deviations of growth, and he made it to the 25th percentile again in 5 months. not an entire academic year. So these statistics are things that we're very, very proud of. So, he went from kind of being the lowest that you could be on this at the first percentile to being right in this average range. And so he's got a little bit more to grow to be, at the 50th percentile average, but significant statistical progress, especially within 5 months' time, which really, again, goes to speak to the power of how the brain can change if you're doing the right things. And then the same picture was actually true for spelling as well. So he started at the first percentile. If he would have grown the amount that we would have expected in an entire academic year, he would have grown to this yellow. If this program had a statistically significant impact on his spelling, he would have grown to this brown dot. But instead, he went 2 standard deviations of growth and ended up at the 12th percentile. In addition, he had, let's see what it was, he had an additional 13 items that were off by just 1 letter, which would have put him actually at the 75th percentile for his spelling, which would have been all the way up here. So just massive, massive statistically significant gains in all 3 categories that we tested. Again, this was 5 months of 10 to 15 minutes of Kristi and her son in their home. So I do want to just remind you that it's not just like a magic wand. This happened for Kristi and for Caleb because Kristi showed up. So it's not that you have access to the program and automatically these things happen. It takes work. And so Kristi, I think, needs to be celebrated in this process because she was truly an advocate. She wasn't willing to accept the less than vibe that was being offered to her. She knew her son was bright. We were not willing to give up. I had my own limited thinking that his expectations had to be less because I just didn't understand. But she showed up. She remained coachable. She was consistent. She was excited for Caleb all of the time and created this beautiful environment in which he could thrive. Her belief is that there's always an opportunity for growth and development. And she said, quote, "This program has by far shown us the best results we've seen in just a few months than we'd seen over the past 6 years." So I think, what's really powerful is, there's a real human life, somebody who has been massively positively impacted by neural growth and development, but this is typical. So when we look at, again, those figures of this is what growth typically looks like in an entire academic year, we know that for a kiddo with dyslexia, they are often behind. So what that means is you need to choose an intervention that is going to close the gap and actually catch them up to their peers as much as humanly possible in the shortest interval. So again, this is what the number would be if this program had a statistically significant positive impact. Our average kiddo makes double that as they travel through the program. So right now, our average kiddo is making 50 percentile points on average change from pre to post in 4 to 6 months. So just super, super proud of the system that we are using to support kids. Again, if you want to dig more into the research and the effects of what constitutes accelerated student learning, this is John Hattie's work, who's been, a researcher, meta-analysis researcher for several decades. And, you can dig into that here as a citation if you want to. But the long and short of it is that we hope that these stories really help you to understand the importance of closing the gap. Because if you don't, and your child persistently struggles over and over again, they do miss out on opportunities. Whether that is the chance to be in classroom with their peers or the chance to try this elective class because instead they have to go to reading intervention, or it's the missed summer because I have to go to remedial reading support all summer long, or it's the career that I may miss out on, or, a lifetime of missed opportunities, current and ongoing struggles, future opportunities. And it's important to recognize that it is not just the child with dyslexia that suffers because of this. Sometimes there are struggles within families because we have neurotypical kids and we have kids with dyslexia, and we start to be really competitive because maybe little brother or little sister has actually surpassed me in my literacy, and now we've got competition and we've got fighting and it's suffering. There can also be a lot of stress on parents. So when you think about the bullying or the failed grades or the tears and the discouragement or the anger every time the backpack comes out every single day, it's suffering. And it's not just suffering for the kid, it's suffering for the family, the parents, everybody that's involved in that child's life. So what really needs to happen is you need an intervention that is going to target the root causes of dyslexia, which is the brain's differences. And you need to support it in neurologically changing and developing so that we can improve academic performance, so that we can increase self-esteem and confidence, so that we can have better mental health and greater access to overall life opportunities. So if you are a parent who is listening to this and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is me, we need help, there's a couple of options that you can take as next steps where we can help you. So one is a dyslexia discovery workshop. So for some of you, you may have just an inkling or a feeling right now that something's not off, but you don't have an official diagnosis. You're not sure yet, but you see all of the same signs and symptoms, just like Kristi did, and you just want more confirmation. Let us know. Send us a comment, message us, and say, hey, I'd really like access to a screener, because in less than 20 minutes, you can screen your child at home and understand whether or not they are actually dealing with dyslexia. So that can be super valuable. Let us know if you need that. And also, if you are a parent who maybe just found out that your child has dyslexia, or maybe you suspect it and you want to get ahead of this as soon as you can, or maybe you're one of those people like Kristi who has already been trying every intervention under the sun for years and years and years and not seeing any growth or progress, and you want to figure out whether or not this intervention, this retraining of how the brain is functioning for language could work for your child, we would invite you to book a complimentary call with our team. And what we'll do is we'll spend about 45 minutes with you, and we'll really dive into your child's data and see whether or not you are a fit, not only based on what your child might need, but whether or not you are ready to be kind of digging in like Kristi and part of our results-driven community. So again, reach out, let us know if you'd like to book a complimentary call. We're happy to speak with you further and figure out if it's a fit. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us for yet another amazing case study review. We will be back in 2 weeks to do yet another review of another one of our amazing client graduates. Thanks everybody for joining. We look forward to seeing you again soon.